I always loved George Cooper. Looking at him, I thought you couldn't ask for a better guy than this. Yeah, he drinks, he loves football, he exhausts himself at work, but simultaneously, he cherishes his kids, and he doesn't burden them with helicopter parenting like their mom does. But you know what really captures me about him? It's not his death. It's not his heart problems. It's not the Helga scene from Mary and George's roleplay nights. What struck me was one simple realization that dawned on me just a few days ago. George Cooper was entirely isolated, not in the sense that he felt lonely in his marriage or that nobody grasped him at work. I'm talking about something distinctly different. He was isolated in his own house, surrounded by the very people he was destroying his life for every single day. And the scariest part, he didn't even fully comprehend it himself. Think about it. Most fans believe the central conflict of the Cooper family is Sheldon, the genius kid. All his needs, his quirks, his career path, everything revolves around him. And when his dad dies, we cry because we feel genuine emotions for this guy. We understand what he truly meant to this family even more than Sheldon did. A lot of people think, man, Sheldon's dad died and didn't live to see his Nobel Prize. But they're deceiving themselves. The richness of this character is something far bigger than the entire Sheldon show. The truth is, George lived in a family where literally every single person was emotionally attached to someone, just not to him. Mary was bonded to Sheldon. Sheldon was engrossed in his formulas, sometimes in his mom and Mima. Missy was devoted to her dad, but as a kid, dependent on an adult, not as an adult, linked to another adult. And Georgie was bound to Mandy and his own world beyond the family. George was like a power source in this family. Everyone drew energy from him to recharge, but nobody was replenishing him back. Honestly, when I figured this out, it devastated me. The thought won't release me, and it clarifies literally everything about his behavior. Hey, welcome to the Character Lab. Today, I want to dissect with you guys why this man was the loneliest person in the entire show, and why none of us recognized it for 7 seasons straight. Let me start with what bothers me the most. I don't even want to think about it. But for you guys, for this video, I got to recall all those scenes where George comes home from work. He's a coach at the high school. He spends all day shouting at teenagers, analyzing plays, dealing with parent drama, getting pushed by boosters. That is emotionally draining work. Trust me, my girlfriend works at a school as a regular elementary school teacher, and I'm telling you what I hear about every single day. The kids and the parents test her patience. Any normal person with that kind of demanding job where every single minute pulls you into another interaction comes home and just wants 5 minutes of silence, or honestly the whole day. But in George's case, you just want somebody to ask him, hey, how are you? How was your day? And what does he receive? He opens the door and walks straight into a war zone. Sheldon demands to be driven somewhere. Mary demands he fix something, explain something, or give her time as a husband. Missy is just screaming because she's a hormonal teenager. Georgie messed something up again. And not one person, not a single one, not once during the day, walks up to him and says, hey, how are you doing? How are you feeling? How's your health? Honestly, I never caught this before. I just watched the show. I laughed. I had fun. But the complexity of these characters still astonishes me. We never got a single scene where someone was genuinely invested in George. Yeah, the polite questions surfaced sometimes, but they were just thrown out to fill space, not to genuinely check on the dad. 7 seasons? Not once. Think about how that's even conceivable. George went out to the backyard with a beer or sat blankly in front of the TV, not because he was an alcoholic. He did it because it was the only way to discover a spot where nobody wanted anything from him. That silence on the patio or the glow of the television was his sanctuary. Cheap, ineffective, gradually destroying him, but it was the only way he had to be by himself. Look, everyone had their outlet. Mary had church, Sheldon had science in his bedroom where he could just vanish. Missy had her teenage pursuits, and a dad who rescued her over and over. Remember when she had a crush on a boy, and George taught her how to play baseball just so the kid would like her? Georgie had the streets, the girls, and eventually Mandy and the baby, and George. Sadly, George just had his spot on the couch, the local bar, a can of beer, and quiet. And there's a detail here that just overwhelmed me when I considered it carefully. Remember how Chuck Lorre personally explained to Lance Barber how to play this character? He said, don't play angry, play hurt. And that became the entire foundation of the character. When George yells, he's not actually being harsh, he's just a wounded man. When he drinks, He's not escaping responsibility. He's numbing the wounds his own family gave him. And none of them perceive those wounds. They see a loud guy in a flannel shirt, but they don't see a tender man who gets cut deep every time they overlook him. And when Sheldon years later says his father was an alcoholic, he literally doesn't grasp what he was observing. Because of his age and his intellect, he just couldn't feel compassion for his dad. The only time in the entire show where I actually witnessed Sheldon feel something was the funeral. Remember that scene? Sheldon was just stunned by his dad's death. The way he regarded people, the way he recalled their last conversation before his dad left for work. That's probably the only time Sheldon contemplated his father. Not as a function, not as a guy who serves him. But sadly, in The Big Bang Theory, he goes right back to remembering his dad, only in a negative way. But the most impactful thing that reached me isn't even about the house. It's about work. Or more specifically, the fact that George never had any genuine friends in his entire life. Try to mention one of George's friends. Still thinking? Most people will say Coach Wilkins probably. Okay, but Wilkins is the guy who literally took his job. He's a coworker and they had a competitive thing going for most of the show. Yeah, they reconciled and George supported him when his life was crumbling. But that's not a friendship between equals. That's George rescuing someone else again. And here I have to bring up what preceded Medford, Galveston, his past, which clarifies his entire trajectory of isolation. This man was a coach in Galveston at a solid school in a great position, and he discovers his coworkers are illegally recruiting players. Any normal person in that situation would just keep silent, keep the job, sustain the family, pretend you didn't witness anything. But George reports it higher up because he has a moral compass that doesn't dim. And what does he receive for it? He gets fired. They get expelled from town and relocate to Medford basically as fugitives. And you know what Mary never expressed to him? Thank you for doing the right thing. I'm proud of you. She never really valued it. To her, it was George messed up again. This man sacrificed his career for being principled, and his own wife viewed it as his failure. There's the foundation of George's loneliness right there in one episode of Backstory. He made the right decision, paid for it with everything, and not one person near him understood the cost he paid. He bore that trauma alone, just like he carried everything else after. And then remember Principal Peterson, the same guy who fired George and then helped him later. That's not a friend. That's just a boss who became a buddy. And you know who came to tell Mary that George had died? Peterson and Coach Wilkins. So at the moment of his death, this man's closest people were his boss and his former rival. That's not friends, that's just coworkers who respected him. And there's one more thing that just makes my blood boil when I think about it. Remember when he got offered the job at Tulsa, a college, a real step up, an actual promotion? It was his one shot at getting out of this Medford Hill. And what happens? Mary, like the typical wife who's only focused on herself and her kids, throws a fit about moving. She doesn't want to uproot the family, doesn't want to pull Sheldon out of school, doesn't want to switch her church. Don't get me wrong, everyone's got their own values. But if we're going by the traditional family model, switching churches isn't exactly impossible, especially if it gives the family financial stability and helps the husband's career. But Mary didn't show one bit of care about George's dreams for the entire show. So he turns down the job again. He just buries his dream for the sake of a family that doesn't even understand the sacrifice he just made. And then in the very finale, the offer from Rice University comes in, and now Mary graciously says, yes, let's go. George was over the moon. This man waited 20 years to get permission from his own wife to have his own career. He shelved his dreams for that long, and when he finally got the green light, he died literally a few hours later. The show is hitting us right in the face. Any real fulfillment of his dreams while he was alive was just impossible. His loneliness was so complete that even the universe wouldn't let him escape it. That's the moment I really lost it. And I started running through every scene in my head. Think about it. Mary has her church friends, Pastor Rob, Pastor Jeff. Sheldon has his weird connections with Tam, with Dr. Sturgis, with President Hagemeyer. Missy has tons of girlfriends. Georgie always has some buddies from school and the tire shop. Mima has Dale, her card-playing crew, and a whole criminal underworld. Every single person in this family has people they can go to and just talk. And George, at his lowest point in his life, when he and Mary were on the brink of divorce, when he felt like a stranger kicked out of his own house, where did he go? to the bowling alley, to Brenda, not to a best friend, to a neighbor he had some chemistry with, just because there was nowhere else to go. And we all know how that would have ended if Missy hadn't run away from home and forced him and Mary to make up. A 40-year-old man, a coach, a respected guy in town, and he doesn't have a single close friend he can call at 3 in the morning and say, "Bro, my life is falling apart. I'm cracking at the seams." Zero. Just a woman from the bowling alley he went to out of pure desperation. That's his real loneliness. Not when there's nobody around, but when there are tons of people around, but not one of them is on your team. And here's the second thought that ties it all together. Mary, his wife, remember their story? A chance meeting, a random night, an unplanned pregnancy, a shotgun wedding. They weren't meant for each other. They didn't choose each other out of love or shared goals. They got married because in 1970s, East Texas, there were no other options. And then this girl found God and turned into a completely different person. The Mary that George married and the Mary he lived with in his last years are two completely different people. The girl he loved got replaced by a religious zealot who looked down on him every minute of every day. Here's where it gets genuinely creepy. In The Big Bang Theory, Sheldon tells the story about how his mom once preached at his dad using dirty words because of some woman. Everyone assumed it was about cheating, but if you look closer at the dynamic between Mary and George and young Sheldon, it becomes clear. Mary preached at him constantly. He was living under 24/7 moral pressure. Every single thing he did got run through her internal filter. Is this Christian enough? This man was crushing beers out in the backyard or hiding out in the Sparks chicken coop, not just from being tired, but because in the living room, his wife was literally praying for his soul. Seriously praying for his soul. Like he was some fallen sinner who needed to be saved ASAP. I can't even put into words how lonely it is to live with someone who doesn't love you, but loves their project of saving you. Someone who sees you not as a partner, but as a test sent by God. This woman was plugged into Jesus way harder than she was plugged into her own husband. And George knew it. He's not stupid. He felt every heavy sigh after his jokes, every raised eyebrow at the sight of a beer can. He saw her going to church to find comfort with Pastor Rob instead of going to him. Mary goes to a young, attractive, understanding pastor and has these deep emotional conversations with him about family and faith. She shares her fears, her dreams, her doubts. And you know who she never talks about any of this with? Her husband. She uses another man as her emotional husband and genuinely thinks it's not cheating because they're not sleeping together. And George sees all of this and goes to the bowling alley to Brenda. And he's the one who's morally clean here because he didn't leave, he didn't betray, he didn't take that final step, but completely alone in his own family. If this show were a little more grown up and not a family show, I honestly wouldn't have been surprised if they showed us a real connection between Mary and Rob. By the way, did you guys ever wonder where Pastor Rob disappeared to after George died? That storyline, in my opinion, never got fully resolved. Yeah, he moved to Arkansas for a job, but I don't buy that it just ended that simply. No matter how hard I try to watch Young Sheldon as a light comedy about a genius kid, I just can't anymore. To me now, it's a real tragedy and a deep dive into every single character. Every time George tightens his lips in response to another one of Mary's sermons, I see a man swallowing another piece of his own soul. Every joke he makes is an attempt to reach people who are listening, but not actually hearing him. And the most painful confession in the whole finale is when adult Sheldon says his father just did everything he could and that he did a lot. He says it years later when he's a father himself, when he understands what it's like to be the adult in a system where nobody owes you anything. And only then does he realize he grew up on the shoulders of a man he spent his whole life thinking was nothing. That's the most painful kind of forgiveness. When the person you're forgiving has been in the ground for 30 years and will never hear your words. When Sheldon stands at Caltech in the finale and says, "I'm exactly where I'm supposed to be," he's only there because one tired coach from East Texas lived a quiet life full of loneliness just so that moment could happen. And if you like, me can't stop thinking about this man. After all this, welcome to the club of those who will be diving deep at the Character Lab forever. That's it for today. I'm going to go cry because while I was putting this together, I got really sad myself. Thanks for watching, guys, and good luck. Thank you, and I mean that. If this resonated with you, please hit the like button and subscribe so you don't miss what's coming next. I have a lot more of this kind of content on the way, and I promise it only gets better from here. See you in the next one.